Welcome to Makati Medical Center. We are from the Infection Prevention and Control Department under the Office of the Medical Director, and we will be discussing infection prevention and control. Let us start with the case of patient HCN, a 78-year-old male who had pre-existing illnesses or comorbidities such as diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, arrhythmia, and post-stroke. Patient was admitted for dizziness with anticipated discharge after 2 weeks. However, on the 12th hospital day, patient complained of right hand pain at the peripheral IV site. The following day, patient had chills and high fever and was started on antibiotics. On the 14th hospital day, blood cultures were ordered, antibiotics were changed, and patient had multi-organ failure. By the 17th hospital day, antibiotics were again changed and patient had to undergo transfusion. On the 18th hospital day, blood cultures revealed growth of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus or MRSA bacteria. Unfortunately, by the 20th hospital day, the patient died. Cause of death is multi-organ failure, secondary to septic shock, secondary to MRSA bacteremia, due to peripheral IV phlebitis. Remember that the patient's chief complaint was dizziness. However, due to the complications of peripheral IV phlebitis, the patient's hospital bill skyrocketed to almost 300,000 pesos. But we must always remember that life is priceless. The next slide will show a video on how infections are spread in the healthcare setting and how to break the chain of infection.
Morning, Barbara. Are you okay? To change that dressing of yours that you've had on for about 2 or 3 days. Yeah, is that okay with you? Yeah. Did you sleep well? What are you reading today? Oh, so you like your cooking,
Let us define infection prevention and control word for word. Infection is the transmission or acquisition of disease. Prevention is the action of keeping from happening or making impossible an anticipated event or intended act. And control is the fact or power of directing and regulating. Hence, infection prevention and control or IPC is a practical, evidence-based approach preventing patients and healthcare workers from being harmed by avoidable infections. Effective IPC requires constant action at all levels of the health system, including policymakers, facility managers, health workers, and those who access health services. IPC is unique in the field of patient safety and quality of care, as it is universally relevant to every health worker and patient at every healthcare interaction. Defective IPC causes harm and can kill. Without effective IPC, it is impossible to achieve quality healthcare delivery. Why do we need to practice infection prevention and control? Because we need to prevent the occurrence of healthcare-associated infections, which are infections acquired in the hospital and are associated with break in infection control practices. It causes increased risk among patients with medical devices. Transmission of organisms that cause high occur in many ways, from caregiver to patient, from environment to patient, or from patient to patient. And remember, high is preventable. A patient with high will have to spend more, may have a more serious illness, will have longer hospital stays, and may have long-term disabilities. These are the types of high monitored in the hospital: ventilator-associated pneumonia or VAP, catheter-associated urinary tract infection or CAUTI, central line-associated bloodstream infection or CLABSI, and surgical site infection or SSI. We will have a more in-depth discussion of these later. How do we prevent the occurrence of high? We start by discussing standard precautions, which are a set of activities designed to prevent the transmission of organisms between patients and staff for the prevention of healthcare-associated infection. They must be applied to all patients who require health care by all health workers in all health settings. Standard precautions include hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette, use of personal protective equipment or PPE, handling and disposal of waste and sharps, handling and management of clean and used linen, environmental cleaning, and decontamination of equipment. First element of standard precautions is hand hygiene, which is the single most effective action to stop the spread of infection. However, despite its simplicity, hand hygiene is still poorly practiced in many healthcare facilities. Hand hygiene may be in the form of hand rubbing using an alcohol-based hand rub and should last for 20 to 30 seconds, or hand washing using soap and water and should last for 40 to 60 seconds. The next slides will show you the proper hand hygiene techniques.
Please note that this technique is not appropriate when hands are visibly dirty or after using the toilet. In these cases, hand washing is required. Hand rubbing should take you 20 to 30 seconds. Use a timer or count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in each of the following steps. Apply a palmful of alcohol-based hand rub in a cupped hand, enough to cover all surfaces of the hands. Rub hands palm to palm, then rub right palm over the back of left hand with interlaced fingers and vice versa. Rub again palm to palm with fingers interlaced. Rub the back of your fingers to opposing palms with fingers interlocked, repeating this action for each hand. Rub rotationally left thumb clasped in right palm and vice versa. To clean the tips of your fingers, rub rotationally backwards and forwards with clasped fingers of right hand in left palm and vice versa. Once dry, your hands are now clean and safe. Hand washing should take you about 1 minute. Use a timer or count from 1 to 10 in each of the following steps. Wet hands with water and apply enough soap to cover all surfaces of the hands. Let the water run smoothly to avoid touching the tap later on. Rub hands palm to palm to obtain a good quantity of foam, then rub right palm over the back of left hand with interlaced fingers and vice versa. Rub again palm to palm with fingers interlaced. Rub the back of your fingers to opposing palms with fingers interlocked, repeating this action for each hand. Rub rotationally left thumb clasped in right palm and vice versa. To clean the tips of the fingers, rub rotationally backwards and forwards with clasped fingers of right hand in left palm and vice versa. Rinse hands thoroughly with running water. Dry hands thoroughly with a single-use towel. If the tap is not elbow operated, use this towel to turn off the tap without touching it directly. Your hands are now clean and safe.
Why are the steps very specific? Because these are the areas frequently missed during hand hygiene. The 5 moments for hand hygiene is proposed as the reference approach for the appropriate performance, teaching, and evaluation of hand hygiene. It does not define specific and multiple procedures and care situations, but it helps focus on essential moments embedded within the care sequence that are essential for hand hygiene. Moment 1 is before touching a patient. Moment 2 is before clean or aseptic procedure. Moment 3 is after body fluid exposure risk. Moment 4 is after touching a patient. And moment 5 is after touching patient surroundings. The next slides will show the rationale and situations per moment. These are the rationale and sample situations in which moment 1 is applicable. These are the rationale and sample situations in which moment 2 is applicable. These are the rationale and sample situations in which moment 3 is applicable. These are the rationale and sample situations in which moment 4 is applicable. These are the rationale and sample situations in which moment 5 is applicable. Other indications for hand hygiene are before handling medication, before, during, and after preparing food, before eating food, and after blowing your nose, coughing, or sneezing. At MMC, the IPCD conducts surveillance to hand hygiene compliance during Moment 1 through direct observation for 1 hour. Critical care units are monitored monthly, while all patient care units are monitored quarterly. Surveillance findings and reports include names of healthcare workers who comply or do not comply to hand hygiene. Our target is 100% compliance. Hand hygiene champions will be recognized, and non-compliances are reflected on the following: in the performance appraisal for employees, and in the annual performance evaluation for physicians. This is the quarterly hospital-wide hand hygiene compliance rates from 2022 until the second quarter of 2024. We believe that through our conscious efforts, we can achieve our target of 100% compliance. Please take note that hand washing with soap and water must be performed if you are handling a patient with Clostridioides difficile or C. diff infection, as alcohol is not effective against C. diff spores. In addition, remember that gloves do not replace the need for hand hygiene. Perform hand hygiene before donning and after removal of gloves. Second element of standard precautions is respiratory hygiene or cough etiquette. It prevents transmission of all respiratory infections in healthcare settings. Avoid going to work if with respiratory symptoms, and consult with EWC or the Employee Wellbeing Clinic if symptomatic. Remember, you need to cover your cough because it likes to travel. Third element of standard precautions is the use of personal protective equipment or PPE, which are specialized clothing or equipment worn by an employee for protection against infectious materials. Examples of PPE are gloves, gowns or aprons, respirators or masks, face shield, and goggles. Gloves are used to protect the hands. Remember to work from clean to dirty, and limit opportunities for touch contamination. Change gloves appropriately, and discard in the correct waste bins, which we will discuss later. And again, perform hand hygiene before donning and after removal of gloves. Gowns or aprons protect the skin and/or clothing. Masks or respirators protect the mouth and nose. Goggles protect the eyes. And remember that personal glasses are not substitutes for goggles. And face shield protects the face, nose, mouth, and eyes. In MMC, this is a sequence for donning or putting on PPE and doffing or removing PPE. The next slides will show you a video on how to properly wear and remove commonly used PPE in the hospital.
Balsam 1860 is a cone-shaped particulate respirator and surgical mask. The 1860S is a smaller version of the 1860. Follow these instructions each time you don your respirator in order to achieve a proper fit. Begin by cupping the respirator in your hand, holding the metal nosepiece at your fingertips. The straps should hang freely below your hand. Place the respirator under your chin with the nosepiece up. While holding the respirator in place, pull the top strap over your head with the opposite hand and position it high on the back of your head above your ears. While still holding the respirator firmly on your face, pull the bottom strap over your head and position it around your neck below your ears. Make sure the straps are not twisted for increased comfort. Place the fingertips of both hands at the top of the metal nose strip and mold the nose piece to the shape of your nose using both hands. Push inward while moving your fingertips down both sides of the nose piece. Always use two hands when molding the nose piece. Pinching with one hand may result in improper fit and less effective respirator performance. Perform the following user seal check each time the respirator is put on. Cup both hands over the respirator, covering it as much as possible and being careful not to disturb the position of the respirator. Inhale and exhale sharply. If air leaks around the nose, readjust the nose piece for a more secure seal and repeat the user seal check. If air leaks around the respirator edges, adjust the position on the face and the straps along the sides of the head. Repeat the user seal check. To properly remove the respirator, do not touch the face piece. Slowly lift the bottom strap from around your neck up and over your head while keeping the respirator seated against your face. Lift off the top strap. Carefully remove the respirator without allowing the outside of the respirator to come in contact with your body, and perform hand hygiene.
Remember these key points on PPE use. Done before contact with the patient, generally before entering the room. Remove and discard carefully on a yellow trash bin inside the patient's room. Remove your respirator outside the room and immediately perform hand hygiene after removing PPE. Fourth element of standard precautions is safe injection practices, since unsafe injection practices pose risks to both patients and healthcare providers. Remember that needles or sharps should never be recapped, purposely bent or broken by hand, and manipulated by two hands. Needles or sharps should be disposed in sharps collectors, which should only be 3/4 full, indicated by the dotted line in the containers. Once 3/4 full, request a new sharps collector through housekeeping and linen services. What will you do in case you have an accidental exposure? First is to perform immediate first aid measures and report to EWC or the emergency department or ED if EWC is closed. And then write an incident report within 24 to 48 hours. The incident report aims to determine the reason or the cause why the incident happened and not to blame the staff. Incident reporting is important for us to create a solution. These are the following first aid measures per type of injury or exposure. These are additional first aid measures per type of injury or exposure. Soiled equipment must be handled with care to prevent exposure to skin and mucous membranes, clothing, and the environment. Reusable equipment must be cleaned and reprocessed appropriately. Cleaning involves removal of foreign material from objects and surfaces, normally accomplished manually or mechanically using water with detergents or enzymatic products. Thorough cleaning is required before disinfection and sterilization because inorganic and organic materials that remain on the surfaces of instruments interfere with the effectiveness of these processes. There are three types of cleaning. Routine cleaning, which is the regular cleaning when the room is occupied, with emphasis on surfaces within the patient zone. Terminal or discharge cleaning, which is cleaning and disinfection after the patient is discharged or transferred. And scheduled cleaning, which is cleaning and disinfection when indicated, that occurs concurrently with routine cleaning and aims to reduce dust and soiling on low-touch surfaces. Most patient care areas should be cleaned by wet mopping. Dry sweeping is not recommended. Any areas visibly contaminated with blood or body fluids should be cleaned immediately with a hospital-approved disinfectant solution, such as Virusol Plus or sodium hypochlorite, commonly known as bleach. Isolation rooms and other areas that have patients with known transmissible infectious diseases should be cleaned with a disinfectant solution at least daily, and all horizontal surfaces and toilet areas should be cleaned daily. How do we improve cleaning or disinfection practices? We need to pay close attention to cleaning and disinfection of high-touch surfaces in patient care areas. We also need to ensure compliance by housekeeping staff with cleaning and disinfection policies and procedures, and disinfect or clean environmental surfaces on regular basis and when surfaces are visibly soiled. Report to FMed Help Desk at Local 3633 if you see molds, water leaks, pests, or other facility-related concerns in your unit. Disinfection is not a sterilizing process. It is a process that eliminates many or all pathogenic microorganisms. There are 3 levels of disinfection: high, intermediate, and low-level disinfection. High-level disinfection destroys all microorganisms except some bacterial spores, especially if there is heavy contamination. On the other hand, intermediate disinfection inactivates Mycobacterium tuberculosis vegetative bacteria, most viruses, and most fungi, but does not always kill bacterial spores. And low-level disinfection can kill most bacteria, some viruses, and some fungi, but cannot be relied on to kill more resistant bacteria such as Mycobacterium tuberculosis or bacterial spores. More than 30 years ago, Earl Spalding devised a rational approach to disinfection and sterilization of patient care items and equipment. Spalding believed the nature of disinfection could be understood readily if instruments and items for patient care were categorized as critical, semi-critical, and non-critical according to the degree of risk for infection involved in use of the items. Critical items are objects which enter normally sterile tissues or the vascular system, and it requires sterilization. Semi-critical items are objects that come in contact with mucous membranes or non-intact skin. It must undergo sterilization or high-level disinfection. And non-critical items are objects that come in contact with intact skin but not mucous membranes. It must undergo cleaning or low-level disinfection. You may refer to these slides for examples of critical, semi-critical, and non-critical items. In the absence of substantial evidence to prove the safety and effectiveness of reprocessing, a unit ensures that medical devices originally manufactured and labeled for single use are disposed. However, in occasions such as due to limited resources, such device is reused, quality parameters are determined to ensure that the medical device is safe for reuse. Reuse and reprocessing of a device intended for single use and an opened but unused single-use device is approved by the Advisory Committee on Reuse of Single-Use Devices. Remember that reuse of any single-use device that is not in the list approved by the committee is prohibited. The symbol on the right side of your screen is the international symbol used on medical device packaging indicating do not reuse, with synonyms of single-use only, use only once, or disposable. When handling soiled or contaminated linen, use clean non-sterile gloves when handling soiled linen. Inspect for needles or syringes, especially while stripping. Do not place on the floor, and place soiled linens inside the cloth hamper. Contaminated linens must be placed in yellow double plastic bags sealed by a knot. To implement proper waste segregation in the hospital, the labels of waste bins are color-coded. The labels also indicate what types of waste must be discarded in that bin. The next 3 slides will show you the labels used for waste bins in MMC. We have finished discussing standard precautions. We now proceed with discussing transmission-based precautions, which are the second level of basic infection control. These are to be used in addition to standard precautions for patients who may be infected or colonized with certain infectious agents, which additional precautions are needed to prevent infection transmission. We have airborne, droplet, and contact precautions. Airborne precautions are used for patients known or suspected to be infected with pathogens transmitted by the airborne route. If possible, non-immune healthcare workers should not care for patients with vaccine-preventable airborne diseases. Diseases requiring airborne precautions are listed on your screens. Since these diseases can be transmitted through air, patients should be placed in a special room called an airborne infection isolation room or negative pressure room. In a negative pressure room, the flow of air is inward. When we transfer patients on airborne precautions, the healthcare worker is required to wear N95 respirator while the patient wears surgical mask. Do not forget to provide N95 respirator to the elevator operator. If a patient admitted in a non-isolation room suddenly requires airborne precaution and an airborne infection isolation room is not available, the guidelines below are followed. Droplet precautions is used for patients known or suspected to be infected with microorganisms transmitted by droplets, which are large particle droplets larger than 5 micrometer in size that can be generated by the patient during coughing, sneezing, talking, or during the performance of cough-inducing procedures. Examples of diseases for droplet precautions are on your screens. Patients on droplet precautions are placed on a single patient room, but if there is a surge of patients, we can cohort patients who are infected with the same pathogen. The healthcare worker should wear a surgical mask during contact. And during transport, the patient wears a surgical mask if tolerated. Contact precautions is used for patients known or suspected with infections that are spread by direct contact through transfer of an infectious agent from one infected person to another without a contaminated intermediate object or person, or indirect contact through transfer of an infectious agent through a contaminated intermediate object or person. Examples of diseases for contact precautions are listed on your screens. Patients who are on contact precautions are placed in single patient rooms. Gown and gloves should be used by healthcare workers for all patient interactions. There is a stop sign that should be placed outside the rooms of patients on contact precautions. C. diff positive patients must be endorsed to housekeeping and to dietary. Contact precautions may be discontinued as ordered by the physician once the patient has no episodes of diarrhea for 2 consecutive days. You might have heard of the acronym MDRO. This stands for multi-drug resistant organisms, which are microorganisms, predominantly bacteria, that are resistant to one or more classes of antimicrobial agents. A multi-drug resistant or MDR bacteria are isolates which are non-susceptible to at least one agent in 3 or more antimicrobial categories. An extensively drug-resistant or XDR bacteria are bacterial isolates which remain susceptible to only 1 or 2 categories. A pan-drug resistant or PDR bacteria are bacteria wherein no agents tested as susceptible for that organism. Patients with MDROs should be placed on contact precautions with dedicated non-critical medical equipment such as BP cuff, digital thermometer, and stethoscope. This is an example of a culture and sensitivity result from the laboratory. The list below the word susceptibility are the types of antimicrobials tested for the sample. The list below isolate 1 with S that stands for susceptible and R which stands for resistant indicates if the antimicrobial will still work for the patient. Only those with S will work for the patient. Notice that only 2 out of the 23 antimicrobials tested will work for the patient. These are common examples of MDROs: MRSA, VISA, VRSA, VRE, ESBLs, and others on your screen. For patient placement, there is an optimum spacing between beds in wards. This is 1 to 2 meters. And for single patient rooms, they should have a hand hygiene station, toilet, and a bathroom. Airborne Infection Isolation Room, or AIIR, are also known as negative pressure rooms, and these are used for patients with diseases requiring airborne precautions. We have AIIRs at the 8th Wing, MSICU, NSCV-ICU, OR-ICTR, and the Emergency Department. The anteroom supports the use of PPE. We commonly see this in airborne infection isolation rooms. We also do cohorting when single patient rooms are not available, but is only conducted with IPC guidance. For patients on transmission-based precautions, we always limit the movement and transport. However, if inevitable, we follow these guidelines. For patients on airborne precautions, the healthcare worker, including the elevator operator, wears a respirator, and the patient wears a surgical mask. For droplet precautions, the healthcare worker wears a surgical mask, and the patient also wears a surgical mask if tolerated. Otherwise, advise the patient to follow cough etiquette. For contact precautions, the healthcare worker wears a gown and gloves for all interactions. Remember to endorse the precautions to receiving unit prior to transport. The following communicable diseases are reportable to the Department of Health in compliance with Republic Act 11332 or the Mandatory Reporting of Notifiable Diseases and Health Events of Public Health Concern Act. If you have patients diagnosed with any of the following diseases, report the case to IPCD. Employees are encouraged to avail of the annual flu vaccine at MMC. If your flu vaccine was administered outside MMC, please inform EWC for you to be counted as a staff who was vaccinated for the year. For other vaccination activities, we encourage everyone to avail of these vaccines if you are eligible. We still see cases of COVID-19 infection among healthcare workers, patients, and the community. Of course, our goal is to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 infection. The succeeding slides will show you the current COVID-19 guidelines of the hospital. This memo was released on April 17, 2024. With the lifting of the public health emergency throughout the Philippines due to COVID-19, IPCD recommends the following updated health protocols in accordance with guidelines from DOH, the World Health Organization, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These are the PPE requirements for healthcare workers. These are the screening protocols for healthcare workers with respiratory symptoms. These are the current quarantine and isolation protocols, regardless of vaccination status. Observe the following infection control measures for safe holding of gatherings. Healthcare workers, patients, companions, and visitors are always advised to frequently perform hand hygiene and observe cough etiquette. The appendix of this memo indicates common aerosol generating procedures. All staff are requested to report to IPCD and EWC if they test positive. Once the isolation period has been completed, the staff needs to secure a fit-to-work certificate from EWC. The DOH National Antimicrobial Stewardship or AMS program mandates all healthcare facilities to implement an effective AMS program in their respective hospitals as a licensing renewal requirement. There are 6 core elements of AMS program, which are leadership, policies, guidelines, pathways, surveillance of antimicrobial usage or AMU, and antimicrobial resistance or AMR, action, education, and performance evaluation. There is a separate module with a more extensive discussion on AMS. Again, these are the types of high monitored in the hospital: VAP, CAUTI, CLABSI, and SSI. This shows the infection rates for CLABSI, CAUTI, and VAP from 2023 to June 2024. This shows the infection rates for selected procedures monitored for SSI from 2023 to June 2024. How do we prevent the occurrence of high? We have care bundles, which are evidence-based practices implemented in the healthcare setting to prevent high. These are usually composed of 4 to 5 interventions that, when performed collectively, can improve patient outcomes. These are the care bundles for VAP. Assess extubation readiness daily, perform oral care regularly, keep head elevated at 30 to 45 degrees, and avoid equipment contamination. These are the care bundles for CLABSI. Select optimal catheter site, use maximal barrier precautions, assess the need for continuing central line access, and replace administration sets regularly. An optimal catheter site is preferably a subclavian site rather than a jugular or a femoral site in adult patients to minimize infection risk. Maximal barrier precautions during central line insertion for healthcare workers and patients should be observed. We also use a standardized central line insertion kit to facilitate consistent approach to central catheter insertion. Promptly remove any intravascular catheter that is no longer essential. Replace the administration sets regularly, and the change of dressing should always be observed. The table shows you the type of set or item and its frequency of replacement. From January to June 2020, the average days of central venous catheter insertion from the date of CLABSI event is 11 days. Hence, the Infection Control Committee, or ICC, recommends removal of non-permanent catheter, such as Mahorcar or Certifix, on the 10th day from the date of insertion. If the catheter is still needed beyond 10 days, ICC recommends insertion of a new central line on a different site or placement of central line that can be used for a longer time, such as a peripherally inserted central catheter or PICC. A clean and dry dressing at the insertion site is important to protect the site and to minimize the risk of infection. There are generally 2 types of dressings that can be used to cover and protect the insertion site: sterile gauze and tape, and sterile semi-permeable transparent polyurethane dressing. The choice of dressing is a matter of preference, given that studies have shown no clinically substantial difference in site colonization or CLABSI rates. Transparent dressing permits continuous visual inspection of the insertion site, help to secure the device, and do not need to be changed as often as gauze and tape dressing. We also have our Central Venous Access Device or CVAD team, who conducts daily rounds on all patients with central lines. They change dressing for central lines if the dressing is due for changing or if visibly soiled or non-intact. They also monitor the maintenance of central lines. Remember to scrub the hub during hub or access port cleansing. You minimize the contamination risk by scrubbing the access port or hubs for 15 to 20 seconds prior to use with an appropriate antiseptic such as a 70% alcohol or chlorhexidine swab. We also have a disinfecting port cover or QROS, which is a central line port cover that provides physical barrier to contamination between line accesses. We also have guidelines for peripheral catheters. The preferred insertion site for adults is the upper extremity site, while for pediatric patients, it may be on the upper or lower extremities or the scalp in neonates or young infants. Remove if the patient develops signs of phlebitis, infection, or if malfunctioning. There is no need to replace more frequently than every 72 to 96 hours. And for children, replace only when clinically indicated. These are the care bundles for CAUTI. Use a small bore catheter as possible. Insert catheter only when indicated. Observe standard precautions and obtain specimens aseptically. There are no routine or fixed intervals for changing of indwelling catheters or drainage bags. You should only change based on clinical indications such as infection, obstruction, or if the closed system is compromised. These are the care bundles for SSI. Use surgical clippers, maintain post-operative normothermia, control of blood glucose level, and to give prophylactic antibiotics within 1 hour before surgery. These are the procedures routinely monitored for SSI by IPCD. You need to document findings accurately for inpatients or outpatients. Any suspected SSI can be reported to IPCD for investigation. Use surgical clippers for removal of hair that will interfere with the surgical procedure on the day of surgery, which must be conducted outside of the operating room. To maintain post-operative normothermia, patients are provided with fleece or air-warming blankets at the recovery room to maintain normothermia at 35.5 to 37.5 degrees Celsius. Blood glucose level monitoring is done for patients undergoing cardiac surgery. Blood glucose level should be maintained at 110 to 200 milligrams per deciliter. Prophylactic antibiotics should be given within 1 hour prior to anesthesia induction and must be discontinued within 24 hours after surgery end time or up to 48 hours for cardiac patients. 24 hours is still appropriate for cardiothoracic surgery. If you have any IPC-related inquiries, feel free to contact us through our email or contact numbers. Remember, prevention is key. Thank you very much and stay safe. Other recommendations for SSI prevention. Advise patients to have a full body shower or bath with soap or an antiseptic agent no earlier than the night before the day of surgery.